I want to tell you about the most expensive apology I ever witnessed in 23 years on the bench. Not expensive in the way you might think. No settlement, no wire transfer, no number with enough zeros to make a grown man's hands stop shaking. What it cost couldn't be measured in dollars. There was a man in my courtroom one Thursday morning. He had polished his shoes before coming in. I noticed that immediately. The way you notice something that took effort, something that said, "I am trying to show you I deserve to be here." The shoes were cracked at the toe, polished anyway. That told me more about that man than 4 hours of testimony ever could. Across the aisle sat another man, suit worth more than most people's monthly rent, a file full of photographs, affidavits, expert evaluations. He was suing the first man for $14,000. Over a scratch, 14 centimeters on the bumper of a car he barely drove. And the way he smiled when he said the defendant probably didn't understand the value of what he damaged. I have seen a lot of things in this courtroom. I have seen killers maintain their composure. I have seen the innocent break down. But that smile, small, nasal, unbothered, sat in my chest the rest of that morning like a stone. What nobody in that room knew yet was why the janitor's cart had swung wide in that parking lot, what he had been running toward, what he stood to lose if he slowed down for even 5 minutes that morning. And when I finally asked him the question that changed everything in that room, the man in the expensive suit stopped smiling. Before starting the story, comment here from where you are watching and what time it is there. If stories of justice, empathy, and hidden truths move you, be sure to subscribe to the channel. There are cases that arrive dressed as small things. A scratch, a parking lot, a man with a mop and a bucket who was somewhere he probably shouldn't have been moving so fast. That's what the file said. That's what the paperwork suggested. A minor property dispute between a building employee and the owner of a luxury vehicle. 4 pages. Neat. Cold, alphabetized. I've learned after 23 years on this bench that the files that arrive thin are sometimes the heaviest ones to carry home. I remember the morning Marcus Webb walked into my courtroom. It was a Thursday. I remember because Thursdays in this building have a particular sound. The radiator in the east corridor ticks differently, slower, like it's already tired before the day begins. The fluorescent light above the witness stand had been flickering for 2 weeks. I'd put in 3 maintenance requests. Nobody came. Some things in this building I'd accepted were simply going to stay broken. The air was thick. November had arrived, but the heating system hadn't caught up to it yet. So the room sat in that uncomfortable middle place. Not warm enough to relax, not cold enough to complain. The kind of air that makes you hold your shoulders slightly higher than usual, slightly tighter, defensive. The kind of air that poor people know well. I heard him before I saw him. Not his voice, his shoes. There's a particular sound that comes from shoes that have been resoled one too many times. A soft, papery shuffle that's different from the confident click of leather on marble. I've heard that sound thousands of times. My father made that sound every day for 35 years. Marcus Webb entered through the left door. He was a man of medium height, broad-shouldered in the way that comes not from a gym but from decades of carrying things. Carts, mops, trash bags, the particular weight of a life spent in service to spaces other people owned. He wore a white dress shirt. I could see from the bench that the collar had been ironed carefully, precisely. The way you iron something when it's the only one you have and you need it to last another year. The top button was slightly different from the others. Plastic, faintly off-white, a replacement. His slacks were black. His shoes were brown, cracked along the right toe but polished. Someone had polished those shoes that morning with great intention. He sat at the defendant's table and placed his hands flat on the surface in front of him. Then he moved them to his lap. Then he put them back on the table and laced his fingers together. And I watched him press his own knuckles until they went pale. He didn't look at the man seated across the aisle. Bradford Holloway III didn't have that problem. He looked at everything with the easy confidence of a man who had never once doubted whether a room was his. Tall, tailored, unhurried. He set his briefcase down the way people set things down when they know someone else will pick them up. He adjusted his cufflinks. He smiled at his assistant. He did not look at Marcus Webb the way you look at another person. He looked at him the way you glance at weather, briefly, without interest, certain it won't affect you. I have met many Bradford Holloways in this courtroom. I have met very few men like Marcus Webb, men who show up to the place they've been summoned, wearing their best shirt, having polished shoes that hurt them, carrying a fear so heavy you could feel it from the bench like a change in pressure. I looked at the file again. $14,200. I looked at Marcus Webb's hands. I picked up my pen and I wrote nothing. I simply held it. And I thought about my father. The clerk read the case number into the record, and the words landed in the room the way formal language always does in spaces like mine. Flat, mechanical, scrubbed clean of every human detail that actually matters. Case number, date of incident, nature of claim, property damage, defendant, Marcus Elroy Webb, plaintiff represented by Bradford Kent Holloway III of Holloway, Sinclair and Associates. I watched Marcus close his eyes for exactly 1 second when his full name was read aloud. Just 1 second. Then he opened them and looked at the table again. The plaintiff's counsel rose before I invited him to. That told me everything I needed to know about Bradford Holloway before he opened his mouth. He spoke well, I'll give him that. Men like him always do. The voice was measured, confident, calibrated to fill a room without appearing to try. He had exhibits. Of course he had exhibits. Photographs of the vehicle taken from 4 angles, time-stamped. A repair estimate from a dealership whose hourly labor rate I was fairly certain exceeded Marcus Webb's daily wage. An affidavit from a parking lot attendant who had witnessed the incident. A second affidavit from an automotive appraiser who had evaluated the damage as, and I remember this phrase precisely, consistent with negligent operation of a commercial cleaning apparatus. A commercial cleaning apparatus. A mop bucket with wheels. Bradford laid each document on the table with the patience of a man performing a ritual he had performed many times and expected to win many more. He spoke about market value. He spoke about diminished resale potential. He spoke about his client's inconvenience, 3 days without the vehicle, alternative transportation costs, the disruption to a busy professional schedule. And then he said it. The comment that had made Marcus press his knuckles white before the hearing had even truly begun. He said it almost as an aside, almost gently, with a small upward lift at the corner of his mouth that wasn't quite a smile but was close enough to function as one. He said that he understood the defendant was a working man, and that perhaps, and he chose the word perhaps with great care, the court might consider whether someone in the defendant's position truly appreciated the value of what had been damaged, whether it was a matter of carelessness or simply a matter of never having been responsible for anything of real worth. The room shifted, not loudly. These shifts never happen loudly. It was the kind of shift you feel in your chest before you hear it anywhere else, a collective intake of breath, a tightening, a recognition that something indecent had just been said and dressed up in the language of reason. Marcus Webb did not react. He sat very still. His jaw moved once slightly, the way a jaw moves when you are biting down on something you have decided not to say. I set my pen down. I looked at Bradford Holloway for a long moment. He met my gaze with the practiced ease of a man who had looked at judges his entire career and learned that eye contact reads as confidence, and confidence reads as credibility. He didn't flinch. He didn't need to, not yet. The public defender assigned to Marcus, a young woman named Reyes, I believe, 2 years out of law school and carrying 12 cases that week, rose and offered a brief response. The damage had been accidental. Her client had a clean record. The amount being claimed was disproportionate. She sat back down. It was competent. It was not enough, and she knew it, and Marcus knew it, and the knowing of it sat between them like a stone. Because here is what the law looked like in that room at that moment. A man with a $14,200 claim, 4 exhibits, 2 affidavits, a tailored suit, and 20 years of courtroom experience on one side. And on the other side, a man with $340 in his bank account, a fraying collar, and a public defender with 11 other places she needed to be. The system was not tilted. It was not biased. It was simply arranged, as it so often is, in a way that made certain outcomes feel inevitable before anyone had spoken a word of actual truth. I have sat on this bench long enough to know that the truth in any case rarely lives in the documents. The documents are the skeleton. The truth is what breathes inside it, and you cannot find what breathes by reading affidavits. You find it by asking the person who was there. I folded my hands. I looked at Marcus Webb. Really looked at him the way I look at everyone who sits in that chair when I have decided that the paperwork has had its turn and now it is time for the human being to speak. The fluorescent light above him flickered once, held, and I asked him the only question that has ever mattered in 23 years on this bench. "Mr. Webb," I said, "tell me why." He didn't answer right away. That's the thing they never show you in films about courtrooms. The silences, the long, breathing silences that live between a question and its answer, where the entire truth of a person is being negotiated somewhere behind their eyes. Bradford Holloway's assistant shifted in his chair. Someone in the gallery coughed. The radiator ticked. Marcus Webb looked up at me for the first time since he had entered the room. His eyes were dark and steady and exhausted, in the particular way that only comes from years of being tired without ever being allowed to show it. He looked at me the way people look at you when they are trying to determine whether you are genuinely asking, or whether the question is simply another instrument of the machinery that has already decided their fate. I held his gaze, and I did not look away. I wanted him to see that I was asking. He swallowed once, and then he began. He told me his daughter's name was Renee. He told me she was 14. He told me she had been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at age 9, and that managing it required a level of precision and vigilance that had quietly restructured every hour of every day of his life for the past 5 years. He told me about the continuous glucose monitor that alarmed when her levels dropped too fast, and how he had learned to read the specific tone of that alarm the way other fathers learn to read their children's crying. The difference between the alarm that meant check on her and the alarm that meant move now. His phone had gone off at 10:47 in the morning. The school nurse. Renee had gone hypoglycemic during second period. She was conscious but disoriented. They needed him to come. He told me he had been on the 4th floor of the building, mid-corridor, the cart in front of him. 40 minutes left in his shift. He told me that his supervisor had already documented 2 late arrivals that month. Once when Renee had a bad night and he'd barely slept. Once when the bus had been delayed. He told me that his supervisor had told him clearly and without ambiguity that a 3rd incident would result in termination. He told me he could not lose that job. He told me why he could not lose that job in the particular arithmetic of a man who has done the math so many times it lives in his body rather than his mind. The insulin, the monitoring supplies, the copays, the rent, the lights, the food, all of it balanced on the single beam of $1,850 a month, and nothing beneath it if that beam broke. So he moved fast. He took the cart around the corner toward the service elevator, and it caught. The front left wheel caught on something, a ridge in the floor, a piece of nothing. The kind of microscopic accident that happens 1,000 times a day in every building in every city and means nothing. and the cart swung wide, and the corner of it made contact with the rear panel of a Porsche Cayenne that was parked 3 inches over the line, 14 centimeters. He knew the exact measurement because he had stood there for 30 seconds staring at it, calculating whether this was something he could fix, something he could report, something he could survive. And then his phone had alarmed again, and he had made the choice that every parent in that situation would make. He went to his daughter. He told me Renee was fine. Juice box in 20 minutes. She was back in class by noon. He told me the notice from Holloway, Sinclair and Associates arrived 6 days later. When he finished, the room was very quiet. Not the performative quiet of a room waiting for its next cue, but the genuine quiet of people who have just heard something true and are sitting with the weight of it. I did not look at Bradford Holloway yet. I wasn't ready to. I needed a moment of my own, because I was seeing my father. I was seeing him in that 4th floor corridor, moving fast, doing the math in his body, choosing his child. I was seeing his hands, cracked and careful, reaching for a phone that showed a number from a school. I was seeing 35 years of corridors and carts and yes sirs, and the particular dignity of a man who has never once been thanked for the cleanliness of a space he made clean. I picked up my pen. I wrote 2 words on the notepad in front of me. I have never told anyone what those words were. I don't intend to start now. And I put the pen down and I looked at Bradford Kent Holloway III. He was sitting straighter than he had been. The ease had shifted slightly, the way confidence shifts when it realizes the room has changed around it without asking permission. He was still composed. Men like him are always composed. But the smile was gone, and in its absence his face looked older and considerably less certain of itself. I took my time. I have earned the right to take my time. Mr. Holloway, I said, you are a skilled attorney. Your exhibits are in order. Your affidavits are properly notarized. You have done everything the law requires of a plaintiff pursuing a legitimate claim. He nodded once, carefully. And yet, I said, I find myself needing to ask you something that is not strictly within the legal record of this proceeding, but which I believe is essential to the full picture of what occurred in that parking lot. The room leaned in. I could feel it. You have known about this case for 6 weeks. You have the financial resources to absorb the cost of a scratch on a vehicle you have described in your own deposition as one of 4 cars currently registered in your name. You chose, with full knowledge of this man's employment and financial situation, information available in the preliminary filings, to pursue the maximum claim in a formal court proceeding rather than seek any alternative resolution. I paused. I am not asking whether that was legal. I am asking whether you believe it was right. Bradford opened his mouth. I raised one hand. I'm not finished. He closed it. You made a comment earlier in this proceeding regarding Mr. Webb's capacity to understand the value of what was damaged. I want to be very precise about what I observed in this courtroom today. I observed a man who polished broken shoes before coming to face you. I observed a man who ironed a shirt with a replaced button because it is the only dress shirt he owns. I observed a man who has spent 19 years maintaining a building that I would wager you have walked through without once learning his name. The silence was absolute. Mr. Holloway, you are going to do something now that I suspect you have not done in quite some time. You are going to turn to your left. You are going to look at Marcus Webb. And you are going to say what should have been said in that parking lot 6 weeks ago, before any of this began. Bradford Holloway looked at me. For the first time since entering my courtroom, he looked at me without the architecture of confidence holding his face in place. Beneath it was something I recognized. Not remorse exactly, not yet, but the beginning of it. The moment just before a man understands what he has actually done. He turned. He looked at Marcus Webb. Marcus looked back at him, steady, tired, waiting. I'm sorry, Bradford Holloway said. His voice was quieter than I had heard it all morning. It was, I thought, probably the most honest thing he had said in this room. Marcus held his gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded. Once. The nod of a man who has waited a long time for something small and is choosing to accept it as enough. I lifted my gavel. The claim is dismissed. Damages not proven to arise from willful negligence. Court finds the incident to be accidental in nature, occurring under documented personal emergency circumstances. All associated filing fees are to be borne by the plaintiff. The gavel came down. Thud. Marcus Webb put his face in his hands. His shoulders rose and fell once, twice, 3 times. The deep, shaking exhale of a man who has been holding his breath for 6 weeks and has finally been given permission to breathe. I have a ritual after difficult hearings. I go to my chambers. I make a cup of coffee. Not from the machine in the break room, but from the small percolator I brought from home 15 years ago and have never once considered replacing. I sit in the chair by the window that looks out onto the side alley, where the delivery trucks park and the pigeons argue over bread, and I give myself exactly 10 minutes to feel whatever the morning left inside me before I put on the robe again and go back out. That Thursday I sat longer than 10 minutes. I thought about the parking lot. I thought about a cart catching on a ridge in a floor. I thought about the specific cruelty of a world in which a man can spend 19 years making a building beautiful and still find himself sitting across from the man who owns the building's parking space, being asked to pay $14,000 for the privilege of having a bad morning. I thought about Renee, 14 years old, a juice box, back in class by noon, not knowing that while she was finishing second period, her father was in a courtroom being told, in the careful language of legal proceedings, that he did not understand the value of things. I thought about my father. I thought about his hands. Then I finished my coffee and I went back to work, because that is what you do. What happened next unfolded over the following weeks in the way that true things sometimes do, quietly at first, and then all at once. Someone in the gallery that morning had recorded Bradford Holloway's apology on their phone. I do not know who. I do not know whether they intended to share it or whether it was one of those impulsive decisions that only make sense in hindsight. What I know is that within 48 hours, the clip had been seen by a very large number of people, and those people had feelings about it. And those feelings spread with the particular velocity that human moments of accountability seem to generate when they occur in a world hungry for them. Bradford Holloway's name trended for 3 days. His firm released a statement. He released a personal statement. I am not in the business of judging what came after my gavel fell. That is between a man and whatever version of himself he decides to become when no one is requiring him to be anything. What I am in the business of is Marcus Webb. Marcus kept his job. His supervisor, as it happened, had seen the clip, had watched Bradford Holloway say, "I'm sorry," in a quiet voice in a wood-paneled room, and had watched Marcus Webb nod with the dignity of a man who has spent a lifetime practicing grace under conditions that do not deserve it. 3 weeks after the hearing, Marcus was called into the building manager's office, not the supervisor, the manager, and offered a senior facilities position, salaried. Benefits package, full medical coverage for himself and 1 dependent. He told me this himself. He came back to the courthouse about 2 months later, not for a case, just to walk in. He stood in the lobby for a moment looking at the marble floors. Then he asked the front desk clerk if he could speak with me briefly, and the clerk, bless her, called up to my chambers and asked if I was available. And I said yes, because I always say yes when someone comes back just to walk in. He stood in the doorway of my chambers with his hands at his sides. He was wearing a new shirt, not expensive, just new, and his and whole. He said he wanted me to know that Renee was doing well, that the new insurance covered her continuous glucose monitor fully, that she had started a school project on endocrine diseases and had told him she wanted to be a doctor. He said he wanted to thank me. I told him what I tell everyone who tries to thank me for doing the only thing this job has ever required of me. I told him I hadn't done anything. I told him the truth had been his. He had carried it into that room in a polished, cracked shoe and a replaced button and 19 years of unnamed corridors. And all I had done was make enough space for it to be heard. He nodded. He started to leave. Then he stopped in the doorway and turned back, the way people turn back when they've been carrying something they almost forgot to put down. He said, "My daughter asked me what the judge looked like. I told her you looked like someone who remembered where you came from." I didn't say anything to that. I'm not sure there was anything adequate to say. He left. I sat for a moment in the particular silence that follows when a room has just held something important. Then I looked out the alley window at the pigeons and the delivery trucks and the ordinary, indifferent machinery of a Thursday afternoon, and I thought, this is why I still come in. Not every case that walks through my doors is dramatic. Most of them are exactly what they appear to be on the surface. Paperwork, procedure, the slow grinding of institutional process. But every so often a file arrives thin and cold and alphabetized, and inside it is something alive, something that cannot be measured in dollars or documented in affidavits, something that the law, at its best, was always meant to protect. I have been asked many times over the years what I believe justice truly is. I have given many answers, but the one I return to most often, the one that feels most honest when I am alone in my chambers with cold coffee and the sound of the radiator, is this. Justice is not the absence of punishment. It is the presence of witness. It is one human being looking at another and saying, "I see what happened to you. I see what it cost you, and I am not going to let this room pretend otherwise." Marcus Webb came into my courtroom carrying 19 years of invisibility and a polished broken shoe. He left carrying the same life he had walked in with, the same daughter, the same exhaustion, the same cracked toe on that brown shoe. But something had shifted, something that doesn't show up in a case file or a court record. He had been seen. If that story moved something in you, if you recognized in Marcus someone you know, or someone you are, or someone you hope the world will be kinder to, then you already understand what this channel is about. Every week I open another file. Every week there is another thin folder with another heavy truth inside it. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one, because the next one is already waiting on my desk, and I promise you, it matters. If this story stayed with you, I want you to pause for just a moment and ask yourself something honest. Have you ever been in a room where someone looked straight through you? Not because you were invisible, but because they had decided, before you opened your mouth, that you didn't matter enough to see. Have you ever had to choose between protecting your dignity and protecting someone you love, and had to let the dignity go? And if you have ever been on the other side of that, if you have ever been the person with the power, the file, the tailored suit, have you ever stopped to learn the name of the person who cleaned the floor you walked across? Marcus Webb polished broken shoes to come into my courtroom. He asked for nothing except to be heard. That is all any of us have ever truly asked for. Tell us in the comments what this story brought up for you. We read every single one. And if you believe in stories about human dignity, invisible courage, and the kind of justice that actually changes people, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The next file is already on my desk.